Thank you very much, Dr. Presby, for the nice introduction and also for inviting me to come here. And thanks to all of you for being here. You may be wondering why I'm advertising myself so prominently. Well, the slideshow I will use has a lot of information in it. So rather than having to copy it all down or try to remember it all, I have the slideshow on my Google Drive. So if you just send me, if you wish to see the slideshow with all the information, you can just send me an email and I'll send you the link. The 25th anniversary of the assassination of the Jesuits and the two women is coming up, November 16th. So what I'd like to present very briefly in a summary fashion is basically what happened, what are we talking about, the martyrdom, what was it? And then what does it mean to us? This is always important because the martyrs can be of great inspiration and a strengthening influence on us. What does it mean? A little bit about the theological and political context. This did not just happen out of the blue, just as an isolated instance. There was a whole political struggle going on, developments within the church that led these Jesuits and others to take a more prophetic stance as critics of society and promoters of change. Then who were they? A little bit about who were the martyrs, the 6 Jesuit priests and the 2 women who were killed with them. The lady was Doña Elba. She was a housekeeper in another Jesuit community, and her 15-year-old daughter brutally slaughtered with submachine gun fire. And then why were they killed? Why did they become martyrs? What were they doing? Or what were they saying? On November 16th of 1989, so almost 25 years ago, 6 Jesuit priests who worked at the UCA, that's the Universidad Centroamericana, Central American University in San Salvador, the capital of the country of El Salvador, were brutally murdered. The 6 Jesuit priests at the university, along with the 2 women who had chosen to stay on the grounds, on the property of the university, because everybody felt that they would be safer on the grounds of the university rather than going home that night. So they stayed in a little extension of the Jesuit residence. They were killed by soldiers, Salvadoran soldiers, that is, soldiers of the government of El Salvador. A squad of about 26 special forces soldiers came onto the university and just broke open the doors of the Jesuit house and went into their room. This was at 2 a.m. on November 16th, so the night of November 15th, going over to the 16th. Broke open the doors, pulled them out of their rooms, and made them lie face down in the garden outside the house, and just slaughtered them. It was just a massacre. Close-up fire shots to their heads, basically. So it was a brutal murder of the Jesuits and also the 2 women. They were machine gunned in the room where they were staying. So it's hard to talk about that. I didn't know them well. I knew 2 of the Jesuits somewhat. And, but when you know somebody who suffers like that and who becomes a martyr, it becomes very difficult. And yet we speak of celebrating. We speak of celebrating the martyrdom. How can we speak of celebrating? Well, it's because of their love. That's what got them in trouble. That's what got them killed. Their love of God, their love of Christ, their love of the gospel, their love of people, their love of the poor, especially, their love of people who were being victimized by the injustice of the society of El Salvador. And so so we celebrate their love, and an active love, a love that made them get involved fully in the struggle for justice. You can't have love without struggle. You can't love people if you're not struggling for justice for them, or for us. So that's why we celebrate the memory and the love and the commitment and the courage of the martyrs. So just I also have this slide at the end of my presentation, but what can we get out of this? Why am I going around the country giving this presentation about the martyrs? I think this can help us to grow enormously. The one lesson would be their example of active compassion. Compassion, for those of us who have studied Latin in our high school days, we know it means suffering with compassion, suffering with. That is, feeling the pain of other people as if it were my own pain. And it is my own pain if we are members of the body of Christ. So compassion, suffering with, but not just as a sentiment, not just as a feeling in my heart, but an active kind of compassion, like the Good Samaritan, or like Jesus himself. You know, they didn't just feel compassion, love for people, but they took action and served people. And in this case, the Jesuits were involved in a struggle for liberation, a struggle for justice, a struggle for change in El Salvador. It's in their case, and in the case of Dr. King, certainly, who comes to mind as one of our best-known American martyrs, it was a kind of a political love. You know, it sounds a little strange, but political love, that is, or at least organized love, whether you're organizing unions or women's organizations or neighborhood organizations, consumer organizations. We just had this tremendous march in New York City, 400,000 people for the, talking about the climate change issue. So it's love that expresses itself in organizing ourselves, organizing other groups that are oppressed to make for change. Because you cannot love people who are suffering if you are not involved with them, not for them, or doing things for them, but if you are not involved with them in doing things, making changes for a better life for them or for us. So I would say political, that is organized love, community organizations, unions, student organizations, whatever. So the famous statement by Joe Hill, the labor organizer of many years ago, don't mourn, organize. Okay? And I think that's what we can say, that's what the martyrs of El Salvador, that's what Dr. King would want us to say. Don't mourn, don't waste your time mourning the horrors of their assassination, but organize for change. You know, carry forward their spirit, carry forward their commitment. That's what we need to do. And I think we can learn that from them. Their love, the martyrs of El Salvador, their love was political, organized, in the sense that they were working for change, working for social change, structural change. We talk about that a lot in Latin America, structural change. That means more than giving a piece of bread or a piece of clothing or a bottle of medicine to people who are poor. It means structural change means changing the system, changing the structures of society so that there is a better life for everyone. So they were involved in that. And that was one of the main reasons that got them into trouble, because they were running our university. They were in charge of our Central American University, a Jesuit university in San Salvador, and they saw that university as an instrument for social change, an instrument for the liberation of the country, the liberation of the people of the country, by being a critical consciousness of society, analyzing the structural problems, analyzing the social issues, and working for effective change. So they were making a difference, and they were feared in a certain sense by the oligarchy and by the military. These people had influence publicly. And then finally, their courage, prophetic courage. You put yourself on the line because you believe in what you're doing and you believe in the need to struggle for change. So we can get courage from them. Also, it's also a great challenge to us. Makes us ask, well, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? What about my work? What kinds of things am I involved in? Am I helping to create a better future for your own generation, for instance, and future generations? What was happening in the church? What was happening theologically that led these Jesuits and other Jesuits to get involved the way they were for justice? Well, we can go back Depends on how far you want to go back. You can go back to the Second Vatican Council, 1962 to 65. You can go to the Medellin Conference in Medellin, Colombia, of the Latin American bishops. They made some very strong statements about structural sin. We had never heard much about that in the church before. Structural sin. We always thought of sin as a personal or interpersonal matter. You harm some other individual. That's what we meant by sin. But there can be structural sin, racism, for instance, that is built into many of our institutions. That's a structural kind of sin. It's not just one person being a racist towards another, but it has to do with the structures of society or of institutions. But let's begin with the 1971 Synod of Bishops made a very remarkable statement, although I've always regretted that word constitutive there. I think we should say essential. So action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world fully appear to us as a constitutive, that is, essential dimension of the preaching of the gospel. Or, in other words, of the Church's mission for the redemption of the human race and its liberation from every oppressive situation. So talking explicitly about liberation. And this is a very authoritative statement of bishops who were meeting in Rome. So here they're kind of taking us beyond sort of imagined dichotomy. Sometimes there can be a dichotomy between our faith commitment to God, our faith commitment to Christ, and our work for justice. But really there is no dichotomy for a Christian, because we are to love God and love our neighbor, and love God in our neighbor. So they're trying to bring those two loves, those two dimensions together. So in our own order, the Jesuit order, the Society of Jesus, we took that up and made this statement: the mission of the Society of Jesus, that is Jesuits, this is a Jesuit university, is the service of faith, of which the promotion of justice is an absolute requirement. That's very strong and very clear. So we're getting beyond that old dichotomy, that old contradiction, imagined contradiction. Some people say, oh, you're working for love of God out of your faith. Others say they're working for justice. We say, well, it's both. And so this had effects, bore fruits in the Jesuits of El Salvador and of course in many other Christians. Some would say the martyrs, a martyr is someone who dies for the faith. That's the traditional definition of martyr. Dies for the faith. Somebody who is persecuted, let's say, by non-Christians somewhere, and they continue to profess their faith in Jesus Christ. So that's a martyr if they're killed. But now we see that someone who's killed because of their struggle for justice, like Dr. King, like these Jesuits and other Jesuits, like the 4 North American women who were killed brutally in El Salvador before this, they're martyrs. Because if you're working for justice and you're killed because of that, then you're a martyr. Because work for justice is an expression of your love of God and love of neighbor.